Ooh, butt first. You want to look?
Yeah.
Stand up and take a look. All right. 35. Wonderful.
On February 6, 2012 at 4:35 a.m., my life changed forever. My life was no longer about my life, but this life that my girlfriend and I had created. Such a beautiful, in my eyes, miracle of life. Shortly after his birth, questions began to pop in my mind, like, what is life? What is the meaning of life? And ultimately, when does life begin? What constitutes what we perceive to be life as we know it? If we could just establish when life begins as a society, we could have a greater appreciation for reproduction and creating life and sustaining it by doing all things that we can to foster it. Because of the baby, I started the semester late, but I was so lucky to find a class so personal to my experience. After one of our first lessons on in vitro fertilization, I really began to wonder, when does life begin? Was it here?
Round, round, get around, I get around, yeah, get around, round, round, I get around, I get around, round, round, I get around.
Or here? Or here? I really couldn't form a grand opinion, so I turned to the experts. Turned out they've been looking to define this very same thing for ages. I found an initial framework centered on 4 classes of thought: the genetic conception view, which is generally held by the church; the embryonic view, which is held by the Protestant church; the neurological view, brain activity; and the oldest and simplest of views, live birth. In a way, they all made sense to me, but I was looking for more of a consensus. So I looked at politics. On April 23rd,
the subcommittee will be in order.
The Senate Judiciary Committee brought in 20 experts to try and define this very thing. The responses were varied a little bit, but the consensus was, that life began in conception. Some of the noted findings were by the father of modern genetics, Jerome Lejeune, and Michelle and Matthews Roth of Harvard Medical School. They even quoted Hippocrates. It seemed like they were all saying life began at conception, which in a way makes sense to me. But again, looking at a fertilized embryo doesn't look like any form of life that I recognize to be life as we know it. So what was the other side of that coin? I thought I'd take a quick look at the extremely controversial issue of abortion. Since the process is to allow the removal of life, what is that opinion? And I found nearly all abortions take place in the first trimester, when the fetus cannot exist independent of the mother, as it is attached by the placenta and umbilical cord. Its health is dependent upon her health and cannot be regarded as a separate identity because it cannot exist outside of her womb. So finally, that gave me some kind of a framework to narrow down the moment where life as we know it begins. There seemed to be a consensus on the pro-abortionist argument that life as we recognize it begins around 3 months. Then I reflected back on our guest speaker, April 3rd, talking about scientists trying to prove that a fetus can feel pain. So was that the benchmark? The recognition of pain, the ability to respond to stimuli? But something still didn't add up to me for the contrarian's point of view about life beginning at conception. If that's the case, how can IVF facilities who routinely discard thousands of fertilized embryos each year not be considered mass murderers? I don't, hear of any protests going on outside those facilities for that purpose, so that didn't add up to me. Where's the consensus about where life begins? So after looking at both sides, I felt like I had some kind of a framework. There's the survivalist view, there's the brainwave view, the heartbeat view, the conception view. There was still no consensus, though. And if scientists couldn't figure it out, me as a liberal arts major certainly wasn't going to change that paradigm. So then I thought back to what I'd just been through, creating and watching my son grow into a person. And I thought I'd look at my own experiences and try and make some sense of that in relation to the overall argument of when life begins. I tried to jog my memory, which is severely sleep deprived, and remember back to the earlier parts of the pregnancy and found myself at the ultrasound at 9 weeks, and how during the ultrasound he moved his hand back and forth. Seriously, I remember the doctor being completely surprised, her jaw dropped, and I'm like, is my baby waving? What exactly is going on? I asked her, has she ever seen anything like that before? She said she's seen some crazy things like twins kissing, just all kinds of stuff, but she never seen that. And that got me thinking, if at 9 weeks activity like that is possible, is life, albeit more minuscule and harder to detect, more present and more capable than we realize at that early stage of development? Then I began to think about, we're living in history. We're on the cusp of so many discoveries in science and medical advances. I mean, 4D ultrasounds have only been around for 10 years, routine ultrasounds 2D 25 years, so we're just now starting to learn about what goes on in utero and the more granular intricacies of fetal development. Then I thought back to my son and his positions of comfort, how he's always leaning on his arm. And that's kind of something that, our family does. My grandfather did it. There's a picture of my dad as a baby. He was doing it. When I was a baby, I did it, and he does it. But even before now, he did it in utero at our 4D ultrasound at 18 weeks. For all I know, he was doing it earlier than that. We just weren't, doing any ultrasounds to know any better. And so my mind just started filling with possibilities of, how maybe fetuses are just more in tune or more cognitive than we may realize, because maybe at that point there's not distinct brain activity, but he's showing signs of being a little Sullivan. He has personality. And then all these little memories just started coming back, like early in the pregnancy, where when he first started kicking, and right around the time of the first ultrasound, maybe 8 or 9 weeks, how he'd kick and kick. And he was a big baby, so he kicked pretty hard. You could see it. And I would sing to him, and he would stop. And if I stopped singing, he'd start kicking again. And if I started singing again, he would stop. This is really early on. And sure enough, fast forward 30-something odd weeks, the day after he's born, he knows my voice, and I sing to him, and he stops. Hush, little baby, don't you cry. Daddy's gonna sing you a lullaby. And if that mockingbird don't sing, so that really told me that there's some kind of an awareness there. That the fact that he would respond to stimuli, me at that point just blew my mind. Finally, I reflected on our discussion in the last class from the reading by Liza Mundy, talking about how special the egg is and its role in reproduction, and how, initially it was always thought that the sperm was the seed of life, but we're coming to find out that it's the egg that actually facilitates and manipulates the sperm by extracting its DNA and telling it where to go and what cells to become. I mean, the egg facilitates all of this. Stem cells applying the same techniques from the cell that's been there all along, the egg. And that stem cells are about reprogramming cells to proliferate and become other cells, in which the egg already does that. So the egg is teaching these cells essentially to forget what they are. Hey, heart cell, don't be a heart cell. Go and be this cell.
Isolate nuclei from adult cells, and then you transfer those nucleotides back into the oocyte. Whatever's in the oocyte, the factors in the oocyte somehow induce this adult nucleus to open up its potential again.
It's just a beautiful thing, and it reminds me how much we're still learning about life and reproduction and the connection between when life becomes life. And from these musings, I'm now more convinced than ever that we have no idea when life starts, because we have yet to realize just how grand and wonderful and complex and beautiful the reproductive cycle of life is. Maybe someday in the future we'll get there, but for now we just don't know. But I'm happy to have my little guy. And even though the origin of when sentient life begins is still unknown, I'm thankful for the beauty and the miracle of reproduction.